Ambassador Hyun-woo Kim walked through the crystal corridors of the Galactic Council building on Nexus Prime, his black diplomatic uniform crisp against the strange blue lighting that filled the ancient structure. The building itself was older than human civilization and had seen thousands of species come and go through its halls, but today felt different somehow. Hyun-woo had been Earth's voice in the galaxy for 7 years now, and he understood the delicate balance that kept peace between hundreds of worlds. As he entered the main chamber where representatives from 43 different species waited, he could feel the usual tension that came before any major discussion. The air recyclers hummed quietly, mixing atmosphere suitable for dozens of different respiratory systems. The chamber was massive, with curved walls that seemed to bend space itself. Each species had their own section designed for their particular needs. The aquatic Merdai floated in their water-filled observation pods while the silicon-based Rocktar sat on heated stone platforms. Humans had a simple raised platform with basic chairs, nothing fancy compared to the elaborate setups other species required. Da-Yun Park sat beside Hyun-woo, reviewing the day's agenda on her datapad. As head of human colonial affairs, she had spent the last decade managing humanity's expansion into space. The numbers were impressive by any standard: 200 colonies across 80 systems in just 50 years since first contact. Other species had taken centuries to achieve similar growth. The Altarian trade proposal is first on the agenda, Da-Un whispered as the session began. Then the mining rights discussion for the Vega sector. Hyun-woo nodded, but his attention was caught by Chancellor Vextar of the Hegemony, whose multiple eyes were fixed on the human delegation with obvious irritation. The Hegemony controlled nearly a quarter of known space and had been the dominant power for over 1,000 years. Their reptilian features and imposing height made them natural intimidators, but humans had never seemed particularly intimidated. The session began with routine matters. Trade agreements were discussed and approved. Border disputes were mediated. Resource allocation was debated with the usual diplomatic politeness that kept the galaxy from tearing itself apart. Through it all, Hyun-woo noticed the subtle deference other species showed toward human proposals. It had not always been this way. When humans first joined the galactic community 50 years ago, they had been seen as newcomers who needed to prove themselves. Young species were expected to stay quiet and learn from their elders. But humans had quickly established themselves as something different. The change had come gradually, then all at once. It started with small incidents that seemed unrelated. A Zelkan patrol had captured a human smuggling vessel and decided to make an example of the crew's children, thinking it would discourage others. Within a week, Zelkan space stations across 3 systems had been mysteriously destroyed by unknown attackers. The Zelkan government quickly released the children and issued formal apologies. Then came the Thorian incident. A group of human colonists had settled on a world the Thorians claimed, despite it being marked as uninhabited on all galactic charts. When diplomatic protests failed, the Thorians decided to raid the colony and take the human children as hostages to force evacuation. The colonists had no military protection and seemed helpless. What happened next became legend. Every human ship within 50 light-years converged on Thorian space. Not military vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even scientific research ships. The crews had armed themselves with mining equipment and improvised weapons. They moved with a coordination that surprised military analysts across the galaxy. The Thorians found themselves facing not an invasion, but something far worse: a migration of angry parents. The human ships bypassed military targets and went straight for Thorian civilian centers. They did not attack randomly, but sent a simple message to every Thorian family: return our children, and we will return yours. The children were released within hours, but the damage to Thorian prestige lasted years. More importantly, it established something that became known quietly as the first rule: never harm human children. Other species began to study human behavior more carefully after that. What they found disturbed many of them. Humans seemed peaceful enough in most circumstances, even unusually cooperative compared to most species. They readily shared technology and resources. They mediated disputes between other species with remarkable fairness. They seemed genuinely interested in building a better galaxy for everyone. But when human children were threatened, something fundamental changed in their behavior. It was not just the parents who responded. but the entire species. Humans who had never met the threatened children would abandon their own safety to help. Scientists would stop their research to manufacture weapons. Merchants would ignore profit to provide supplies. Even human criminals would pause their activities to join rescue efforts. Dr. Young-Suk Lee had written the most comprehensive study on human protective instincts, and her conclusions were required reading in diplomatic schools across the galaxy. Humans, she explained, had evolved as cooperative breeders, where the entire group shared responsibility for protecting young. This trait had been amplified during their violent pre-spaceflight history, where child mortality was a constant threat. What made humans unique was not their individual strength or intelligence, which were merely average by galactic standards. What made them dangerous was their ability to coordinate massive responses to threats against their young. Other species protected their own offspring, but humans seemed to view all human children as belonging to the entire species. This understanding had gradually transformed galactic politics. Human proposals were rarely opposed directly because nobody wanted to risk being seen as threatening human interests. When humans suggested something, other species found ways to make it work rather than create conflict. The Galactic Council had become more peaceful and productive. As a result, Chancellor Vextar had been growing increasingly frustrated with this arrangement. The hegemony had dominated the galaxy through strength and intimidation for millennia, but human influence continued to grow through cooperation and mutual benefit. Worse, other species were beginning to adopt human approaches to diplomacy and trade. The human expansion into the Cygnus sector requires council approval, Vextar said during the afternoon session, his translated voice carrying clear hostility. The hegemony formally objects to further human colonization without proper oversight. Yunwu stood to respond, choosing his words carefully. The colonies in question are established on uninhabited worlds with full environmental clearance. All required documentation has been filed according to standard procedures. Standard procedures that humans helped write, Vextar replied. The Council has become too accommodating to human interests. Other species deserve equal consideration. The chamber grew quiet as delegates recognized the challenge in Vextar's words. Direct confrontation with humans had become rare, and most species preferred to avoid it entirely. Dae-Yun leaned forward in her chair. The hegemony is welcome to propose changes to colonization procedures through proper channels. Human colonies have always followed established protocols. Before Vextar could respond, an aide approached Hyunwoo with an urgent message tablet. The ambassador read quickly, his face growing pale as he processed the information. He read it, again to make sure he understood correctly, then looked up at the assembled delegates' council members. Hyunwoo said, his voice carefully controlled. I have just received word that the colony ship New Busan has failed to report from its scheduled stop in hegemony space. The vessel was carrying 3,000 colonists to the Kepler 442 system. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs as delegates began consulting their own information networks. Colony ships going missing was serious business that affected everyone's. Security Vextar's multiple eyes blinked slowly. The hegemony will investigate this matter and report our findings to the council. The New Busan was carrying 800 children, Hyunwoo added quietly. The chamber fell completely silent. Every delegate understood the implications of those words. In 50 years of galactic politics, one rule had never been broken. Human children were never to be harmed or threatened under any circumstances. Vextar's scales seemed to shift color, slightly. The hegemony will make every effort to locate the missing vessel. Hyunwoo gathered his materials and stood. This session is adjourned pending resolution of this matter. All human diplomatic staff are advised to return to their vessels immediately. As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, other species watched with growing unease. The first rule had kept the galaxy peaceful for decades, but now it might have been broken. The question was whether it had been broken by accident or by design. 3 weeks had passed since the New Busan disappeared, and the galaxy held its breath waiting for news. Every species with ships in the area had joined the search efforts, but space was vast, and colony ships could be anywhere among billions of possible locations. The hegemony had deployed their most advanced sensor arrays and promised regular updates to the Galactic Council. Ma Young-Choi pressed her face against the small window of her detention cell and watched the alien sunrise paint. the purple sky of Kethmore in shades she had no names for. The hegemony prison facility stretched out below her like a metal cancer on the planet's surface, all sharp angles and intimidating architecture designed to break the spirit of anyone unfortunate enough to be held there. The journey to this place had been terrifying for everyone aboard the New Busan. The colony ship had been intercepted while refueling at a remote station in hegemony space, exactly as their filed flight plan indicated they would be. The hegemony forces had boarded without warning and overwhelmed the minimal security crew within minutes. Captain Hanseo had tried to negotiate, but the boarding party had been prepared for this mission. They separated the colonists into groups, based on age and occupation, processing them with military efficiency. The adults were loaded onto transport ships bound for labor camps, while the children were brought here to Kethmore. Mi Young had been allowed to accompany the children because of her medical training, though she suspected the real reason was that someone wanted a witness to what was happening. The conditions in the detention facility were deliberately harsh: minimal food, uncomfortable sleeping arrangements, and constant surveillance designed to create maximum psychological pressure. The children handled it better than the adults might have expected. Tae-jin Park, an 8-year-old boy whose parents were agricultural specialists, had somehow become an unofficial leader among the younger ones. He organized games to keep everyone occupied and made sure the smallest children got enough to eat. From their meager rations, Dr. Choi, Tae-jin said from the doorway of her cell. Sora wants to know if you can look at Minho's cough. Mi Young followed the boy through the corridor to the common area where the children spent most of their time. The guards allowed limited movement within their section of the facility, probably because keeping children locked in individual cells required too much supervision. So-ra Kim sat with a group of younger children, maintaining their daily lessons with nothing but her memory and improvised materials. Before the colony mission, she had been a primary school teacher preparing to establish educational programs on their new world. Now she was the only thing standing between these children and complete despair. It started yesterday, So-ra explained as Mi Young examined 6-year-old Minho. He's been trying not to cough because he doesn't want to worry the others. The boy's breathing was slightly labored, and his temperature was elevated, probably from the recycled air system that was not designed for human physiology. Mi Young had been requesting proper medical supplies for weeks, but the facility administrators ignored most of her communications. It's just irritation from the air, she told So-ra quietly. Keep him hydrated and away from the others if possible. What worried Mi Young more than the immediate health issues was the gradual decline in morale she was seeing. The children were resilient, but they were also smart enough to understand that something was very wrong with their situation. They asked questions about when their parents would come and when they could go home, and the adults had no good answers to give them. The facility's main view screen activated without warning, showing the familiar emblem of the hegemony government. Chancellor Vextar appeared, his reptilian features magnified to intimidating proportions as he addressed both the prisoners and whatever audience was receiving this transmission. Citizens of the galaxy, Vextar began, his translated voice carrying across the facility's speakers. For too long, the hegemony has watched while human influence corrupts the natural order of galactic civilization. Today, we take action to restore proper balance. The camera angle shifted to show the detention facilities, main corridor where human children could be clearly seen. Mi Young felt sick as she realized this was being broadcast across the galaxy as some kind of political statement. These human colonists violated hegemony sovereignty by entering our space without proper authorization, Vextar continued. They will be released unharmed when humanity withdraws from the Cygnus, Vega, and Altair sectors and submits to proper oversight of their expansion activities. Tae-jin moved closer to Mi Young, his young face showing confusion and fear. The other children gathered around them as they tried to understand what was happening. So-ra put protective arms around the smallest ones while maintaining a calm expression that belied her own terror. The galaxy has been deceived by human propaganda about their peaceful intentions, Vextar's speech continued. These images prove that humans are no different from any other species when their interests are challenged. There will be no special treatment and no exceptions to proper galactic law. The transmission showed more footage of the children, deliberately focusing on their obvious distress and inadequate living conditions. Mi-young realized this was psychological warfare designed to pressure human authorities into accepting hegemony demands. What Vextar had fundamentally misunderstood was the nature of human response to such tactics. Other species might negotiate, under such circumstances, weighing the lives of a few against the interests of many. But humans had evolved different instincts when it came to protecting their young, Dr. Choi. Tae-jin asked quietly, "Are we going to be okay?" Mi-young knelt down to meet his eyes, choosing her words carefully. "Your parents love you very much, and so do all the other adults back on Earth and in the colonies. They will not forget about you." "But what if they can't?" "Find us. They will find us," Mi-young said with more confidence than she felt. "Humans are very good at finding their children." The transmission ended and the facility returned to its normal routine of guards and surveillance. But something had changed in the atmosphere. Even the hegemony personnel seemed nervous about what they had just participated in. Over the following days, Mi-young noticed increasing activity around the facility. More ships arrived and departed regularly. Communication traffic increased dramatically. The guards became more tense and began checking their weapons more frequently. Sora continued her improvised lessons, but now included stories about human history and the importance of staying strong during difficult times. She told the children about their ancestors who had survived wars and disasters and hardships that seemed impossible to overcome. "People like to say that humans are weak," Sora explained during one of their informal history lessons. "But we're not weak. We're something else entirely. We're stubborn," Tae-jin raised his hand. "What does stubborn mean?" "It means we don't give up easily," Sora replied. "Especially when it comes to protecting the people we love," Mi-young watched from the corner as Sora worked to maintain hope among the children while managing her own fears about their situation. The teacher had become more than an educator. She was a guardian of morale and a source of stability in an increasingly uncertain environment. The hegemony had made a critical error in their assessment of human nature. They believed that threatening children would make humans more compliant and willing to negotiate. They had studied human history and seen evidence of compromise and political calculation in various conflicts. What they had missed was the distinction between political conflicts and threats to human children. When human governments negotiated and compromised, they were balancing competing interests among adults who could defend themselves. But when human children were threatened, different instincts took over entirely, somewhere in space. Every human who had seen Vextar's transmission was experiencing the same evolutionary response that had helped their species survive countless dangers over millions of years. The rational parts of their minds that normally guided diplomatic and political decisions were being overridden by something much older and more fundamental. Mi-young did not know this yet, but across human space, parents were pulling their children closer and looking up at the stars with expressions that had not been seen since the ancient days when predators stalked human settlements. Scientists were abandoning their research to design weapons. Merchants were converting cargo ships to carry military supplies. Peaceful colonists were learning to use equipment that could double as tools of war. The first rule had been broken deliberately and publicly. Chancellor Vextar had wanted to demonstrate that humans received no special treatment in his galaxy. He was about to learn why that rule had existed in the first place. The emergency session of Earth's Defense Council had been called within hours of Vextar's transmission, but the real decisions were already being made in homes and workplaces across human space. Admiral Yoon-ji Song stood before the massive tactical display in the command center beneath Geneva, watching as status reports flowed in from every human settlement in the galaxy. What she was seeing defied every standard military doctrine she had learned in 30 years of service. The human response was not coming from government orders or military commands, but from something far more basic and impossible to control. Parents across 200 colonies were volunteering for combat roles. Research stations were converting their fabrication systems to produce weapons. Even the most peaceful human settlements were organizing militia units, Admiral. Captain Jun-Ho Lee reported from his position at the communications console. The 7th Fleet is reporting full volunteer status for combat operations. Every ship in the fleet has more volunteers than available positions, Yoon-ji nodded grimly. The 7th Fleet had been conducting routine patrol operations in the outer colonies when the news broke. Within 12 hours, every off-duty crew member had reported for emergency assignment, and ships throughout the sector had requested permission to join the fleet for combat operations. Colonel Wu Jin Han entered the command center carrying a data pad filled with intelligence reports that made disturbing reading. We have confirmed locations for 17 hegemony military installations and the primary government complex on their homeworld. Our agents have also provided detailed information about their defensive capabilities. How detailed? Yunji asked. Complete. Architectural plans, security protocols, and personnel schedules for every major facility, Wu Jin replied. It seems our diplomatic staff has been very thorough in their cultural exchanges over the years. The intelligence was almost too comprehensive, revealing decades of careful observation and preparation that most species would consider impossible to achieve. Humans had approached galactic civilization with genuine intentions of peaceful cooperation, but they had also maintained detailed knowledge of potential threats with the thoroughness that characterized their approach to everything involving the safety of their children. Dr. Young-Suk Lee arrived at the command center carrying her research files on human behavioral patterns, the same research that had helped establish the first rule 50 years earlier. Her work had been academic then, an interesting study of species psychology that other civilizations found useful for diplomatic purposes. They don't understand what they've done, she said without preamble as she joined the senior staff around the tactical display. The hegemony thinks this is political theater that will make humans more willing to negotiate? What is it really? Yunji asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Species survival response, Dr. Young-Suk replied. Every human who saw that transmission is now experiencing the same neurochemical changes that helped our ancestors survive predator attacks on prehistoric settlements. Rational thought is being suppressed in favor of protective instincts that evolved over millions of years. The implications were staggering even for military personnel accustomed to planning large-scale operations. This was not a government response or even a military response. It was an entire species mobilizing for war, according to instincts that operated below the level of conscious thought. Captain Jun-Ho looked up from his console with another report. Ma'am, we're receiving volunteer applications from human civilians throughout the galaxy. Scientists, teachers, merchants, even children too young for military service are requesting ways to contribute to rescue operations. How many applications? Yunji asked. Current count is approaching 40 million and increasing exponentially. Number was impossible to process in any meaningful military context. The entire human population of the galaxy was roughly 2 billion spread across 200 colonies and Earth itself. If the volunteer rate continued, they would soon have the largest military force in galactic history, composed entirely of civilians who had no formal combat training. Dr. Young-Suk had predicted something like this in her research, but seeing it happen in real time was still overwhelming. In pre-space flight human societies, threats to children would trigger community-wide responses where every adult became a potential warrior. We're seeing the same pattern but on a galactic scale. The tactical display updated with new information as human ships throughout space began changing course toward hegemony territory. Cargo vessels, passenger liners, research ships, and private transports were all moving in the same direction with improvised weapons and volunteer crews. What made the response even more remarkable was its coordination, despite having no central command structure. Individual humans were making the same decisions simultaneously based on shared instincts rather than orders from any authority. Scientists were abandoning research projects that had taken years to develop. Merchants were ignoring profitable contracts to provide free transportation and supplies. Colonists were leaving their new homes to join rescue efforts for children they had never met. The Galactic Council is requesting an emergency session, Captain Jun-Ho reported. They want to discuss diplomatic solutions before the situation escalates further. Yunji considered this for several moments before responding. Diplomatic solutions assumed that what was happening could be controlled through normal political processes, but the human response was beyond the reach of traditional diplomacy. Send our regrets, she said finally. Inform the Council that human leadership is currently focused on rescue operations and will resume diplomatic discussions after all human children are safely recovered. Colonel Wu Jin pulled up additional intelligence reports on his own display. We have detailed information about hegemony family structures and the locations of their government officials' relatives. Standard doctrine suggests we could use this information to apply pressure for the children's release. The suggestion hung in the air while everyone in the command center contemplated its implications. Human intelligence services had apparently been gathering information about potential hostages among other species with the same thoroughness they applied to military targets. Dr. Youngsuk shook her head slowly. That's not how this works. Humans don't threaten other species' children even in retaliation. Our protective instincts extend to all young regardless of species. Then how do we pressure them to release our children? Wu Jin asked. We don't pressure them, Yunji said with growing certainty. We eliminate their ability to threaten children ever again. The distinction was important and reflected something fundamental about human psychology that other species consistently misunderstood. When humans felt their children were threatened, they did not seek negotiated solutions or acceptable compromises. They sought to permanently remove the source of the threat. Admiral Yunji activated the fleet-wide communication system to address all human ships converging on hegemony space. Her message would be heard by military vessels and civilian volunteers alike, all of whom were now part of the same mission. This is Admiral Song of the Terran Defense Force, she began. As of this moment, all human ships are operating under emergency protocols for the protection of human children. Our objective is simple: secure the immediate release of all hostages and ensure that no human child will ever face such threats again. She paused to let that sink in before continuing. To our civilian volunteers, your courage honors our entire species, but remember that we are still human and we still follow human values. We protect children, all children, regardless of their species. We do not become monsters to fight monsters. The response from the fleet was immediate and unanimous. Every ship acknowledged the mission parameters and confirmed their commitment to both rescue the human children and maintain human moral standards throughout the operation. What Yunji did not say in her transmission was what everyone in the command center understood. The hegemony had fundamentally misunderstood human nature and was about to learn why the first rule had kept the galaxy peaceful for 50 years. Humans were not dangerous because they were aggressive or militaristic. They were dangerous because they were willing to sacrifice everything, including their own lives and civilization, to protect their children, and they were very, very good at it. The human fleet materialized at the edge of hegemony space like a storm front moving across an ocean, but what emerged from hyperspace defied every conventional understanding of military operations. Admiral Eunji Song watched from the bridge of the battleship Seoul as hundreds of vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, despite having no unified command structure. The fleet included every type of ship humans had ever built. Warships designed for system defense, cargo haulers converted to carry troops and supplies, passenger liners filled with volunteer fighters, research vessels equipped with improvised weapons, and even private transports whose owners had joined the rescue mission. What united them was not military discipline, but something far more powerful. Signal from the hegemony homeworld. Captain Jun Ho reported from his position at the communications station. Chancellor Vextar is requesting immediate negotiations. Yeon-ji studied the tactical display showing hegemony defensive positions throughout the system. Their military had been designed to intimidate other species through displays of overwhelming force, but humans had spent 50 years quietly studying every aspect of hegemony capabilities while maintaining peaceful diplomatic relations open. A channel to all hegemony military and civilian installations, she ordered. The view screen activated to show Yunji addressing not just military commanders, but every hegemony citizen who might be listening. Her message was simple and delivered in the calm tone that humans used when they were absolutely certain of their course of action. Citizens of the hegemony, she began. You are holding 800 human children hostage on the planet Kethmore. You have 24 hours to release them unharmed and return them to their families. This is not a negotiation or a demand. It is information about what must happen for your civilization to continue existing. The transmission was broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited world in hegemony space, bypassing military communication, networks, and reaching civilian populations directly. What followed was not a threat, but an explanation delivered with the patience of someone teaching a child about natural consequences. Some of you may believe that humans are weak because we prefer peaceful solutions to most problems, Yunji continued. This is a misunderstanding of human nature. We are not weak. We simply reserve our strength for protecting what matters most to us. You have now threatened what matters most to us. Colonel Wu Jin Han monitored the response from hegemony forces as Admiral Yunji's message played across their space. Military commanders were scrambling to coordinate defensive responses, but their communications were being systematically intercepted and analyzed by human intelligence systems that had been quietly mapping hegemony networks for decades. Their fleet is moving to defensive positions around the homeworld, Wu Jin reported. Standard formation suggests they're preparing for a conventional assault on their primary installations, Yunji nodded, but did not change the fleet's position at the edge of the system. The human response would not follow conventional military doctrine because this was not a conventional military operation. The goal was not to defeat the hegemony in battle, but to ensure that human children were never threatened again. Signal the special operations teams, she ordered. On Kethmore, Mi Young Choi was trying to keep the children calm as activity around the detention facility increased dramatically. Hegemony guards were obviously nervous about something and had been reinforcing security systems throughout the day. The children could sense the tension and were asking more questions than the adults could answer. Dr. Choi, Tae Jin asked from his position near the window where he had been watching transport ships land and take off. Something's happening outside. Mi Young joined him at the window and saw what had captured his attention. The normal pattern of facility operations had changed completely, with vehicles and personnel moving in obvious preparation for some kind of emergency. Guards were checking weapons and communication equipment with the urgency of people expecting trouble. Sora Kim gathered the children in the common area for what she called story time, but was really an attempt to distract them from the growing tension. She told them about human explorers and adventurers who had faced impossible odds and found ways to overcome them through courage and cleverness. Every human who has ever lived has ancestors who survived terrible dangers, she explained to the group of young faces looking up at her. We carry their strength inside us, and we never give up on the people we love. The facility's communication system activated with an announcement from the warden, a particularly intimidating hegemony official whose multiple arms and predatory features were designed to project authority. His translated voice carried obvious strain as he addressed both prisoners and guards. All personnel are to maintain current security protocols, he announced. There is no immediate danger to facility operations, and all prisoners will remain in their current locations until further notice. What the warden did not mention was that human special forces teams had been infiltrating hegemony space for years as part of routine intelligence operations. Colonel Wu Jin Han had activated sleeper agents throughout the hegemony, who had been living normal lives while gathering information about potential targets. These agents were not soldiers in any traditional sense, but ordinary humans who had volunteered for long-term intelligence work because they understood that protecting human children might someday require detailed knowledge of potential threats. They included teachers, merchants, technicians, and researchers who had spent years building relationships and learning about hegemony society. When the children were taken, these ordinary people had transformed into something else entirely. Within hours of Vextar's transmission, they had begun mapping every security system, transportation network, and communication hub in hegemony space with the methodical thoroughness that characterized human preparation for any task involving child safety. The rescue operation began not with a military assault, but with a systematic shutdown of hegemony infrastructure that demonstrated just how thoroughly humans had prepared for this possibility. Power grids failed on dozens of worlds simultaneously. Communication networks went dark across entire sectors. Transportation systems stopped functioning according to precisely coordinated schedules. Colonel Wu Jin's special forces teams moved through hegemony space like ghosts, disabling military installations and government facilities with surgical precision. They avoided civilian targets completely, but eliminated every system that could be used to threaten or harm the hostages on Kethmore. The lights went out without warning, and emergency power systems failed to activate. The detention facilities' sophisticated security measures became useless when the computers controlling them lost power. Guard communication equipment stopped working, and weapons systems shut down as their power sources were systematically disabled in the darkness. Mi Young heard the distinctive sound of human voices calling softly through the corridors. Rescue teams had penetrated the facility while the guards were still trying to understand what had happened to their technology. "Children," Sora called quietly. "Stay together and listen for instructions from the adults." Taejin grabbed Mi-young's hand as figures in dark clothing appeared with portable lighting systems, their faces covered but their voices unmistakably human. The rescue teams moved with efficiency that suggested they had studied the facility's layout extensively before arriving. "Dr. Choi," one of the rescuers said, "we're here to take you home. Are any of the children injured or in need of immediate medical attention?" "Minho has respiratory issues from the air recycling system," Mi-young replied quickly. "Everyone else is scared but physically okay." The rescue proceeded with remarkable speed as teams of humans guided small groups of children through corridors that were no longer protected by the facility's security systems. Hegemony guards found themselves unable to communicate with their commanders or activate any of their defensive measures. Outside the facility, human transport ships waited with medical teams and temporary shelters prepared for traumatized children. The entire operation had been planned and executed with the kind of attention to detail that humans brought to anything involving child welfare. But even as the children were being evacuated to safety, Admiral Yoon Ji-song was implementing the second phase of the human response. The rescue had been successful, but the threat to human children had not been eliminated. The 24-hour deadline had not yet expired, but Chancellor Vextar's government had just learned that their entire civilization was now completely defenseless against further human action. The question was whether they were wise enough to surrender before learning what humans did to those who threatened their children. 6 months later, the Galactic Council chambers looked much the same as they had before the crisis, but everything else had changed in ways that would reshape civilization for generations to come. Ambassador Hyun-woo Kim walked through the familiar crystal corridors knowing that he was no longer just representing Earth's interests, but something far more significant. The human children from the New Busan had all recovered from their ordeal with remarkable resilience, but their rescue had cost the hegemony everything they had built over 1,000 years of galactic dominance. What remained of their civilization existed under human protection, their worlds administered by the same species they had tried to intimidate. Dae-yeon Park sat in her usual position beside Hyun-woo, but her role had expanded from colonial affairs to something called Universal Child Protection Services. The bureaucratic title barely captured the scope of what humans had created in the aftermath of Vextar's miscalculation. "The Altarian delegation has requested human oversight for their new education policies," Dae-yeon reported quietly as delegates filled the chamber. "They want to ensure their school systems meet human standards for child welfare." Hyun-woo nodded absently as he watched species representatives taking their seats with the careful deference that had become standard when dealing with human proposals. The change had been gradual but unmistakable. Where other species had once seen humans as useful allies, they now recognized them as the ultimate arbiters of acceptable behavior regarding children. Admiral Yoon Ji-song entered the chamber wearing her dress uniform, the same one she had worn during the brief war that eliminated the hegemony as a political entity. She now served as Director of Galactic Child Safety Operations, a position that had not existed before humans demonstrated what happened to civilizations that threatened their young. The session began with Chancellor Vextar's former aide, now representing what remained of hegemony space under human administration. The reptilian diplomat spoke with obvious nervousness as he reported on rehabilitation efforts in former hegemony territory. "All former detention facilities have been converted to educational centers," he announced to the assembly. "Human administrators report significant progress in establishing proper child welfare protocols throughout our worlds." What he did not mention was that hegemony society was being systematically rebuilt according to human concepts of how civilized beings should treat their young. The process was not punitive, but it was thorough, reflecting human determination to ensure that such threats never emerged again. Hyjin Park sat in the observation section reserved for distinguished guests, now 9 years old and somehow both, a symbol of human resilience and a reminder of what happened to those who threatened human children. Beside him sat Sora Kim, who had been appointed as education coordinator for the new protection protocols. The boy had become something of a celebrity throughout human space. though his parents worked hard to ensure he had as normal a childhood as possible under the circumstances. His presence at council sessions served a diplomatic purpose, reminding everyone that human policies were ultimately about protecting real children with names and faces and dreams. Dr. Young-Suk Lee approached the speaker's platform to present her latest research on interspecies child development, work that had become the foundation for galactic law regarding the treatment of young sentient beings. Her conclusions had evolved from academic curiosity to practical governance that affected billions of lives. Our studies confirm that protective instincts toward young are universal among sentient species, she began, addressing delegates who now hung on her every word. What varies is the scope and intensity of those instincts, with humans showing the most extensive protective responses in the galaxy. The research had revealed something that transformed understanding of human psychology and behavior. While other species protected their own offspring, humans had evolved to view all children as deserving protection, regardless of genetic relationship or even species affiliation. The events on Kethmore demonstrated that human protective instincts extend beyond their own species, Dr. Young-Suk continued. During the occupation of former hegemony worlds, human forces have shown the same protective behavior toward hegemony children as they show toward their own. This was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of what had happened after the rescue operation. As human administrators took control of former hegemony territory, they had applied the same child welfare standards to hegemony young as they demanded for human children. Alien children were provided with better nutrition, education, and medical care than they had received under their own government. Colonel Wu Jin-han, now Director of Child Protection Enforcement, provided his quarterly report on compliance with the new galactic standards. Every civilization in known space had voluntarily adopted human child welfare protocols rather than risk being seen as a potential threat. Compliance rates remain at 100% across all member species, he reported. No violations of child protection standards have been recorded since implementation of the new protocols. The numbers reflected a fundamental shift in galactic politics, where human influence had grown not through conquest or intimidation, but through demonstrated commitment to protecting innocence. Other species had realized that aligning with human values provided security and prosperity that traditional power structures could not match. What made the transformation even more remarkable was that humans had not sought to rule other species, but simply to ensure that no child anywhere would face what the children of the New Busan had experienced. The result was a galaxy where child welfare had become the primary measure of civilized behavior. Ma Young-choi, now serving as Chief Medical Officer for Child Protection Services, addressed the Council about health standards being implemented across all member worlds. Her experience caring for human children under impossible conditions had made her an expert on what children needed to thrive regardless of their species. Medical care for young sentients has improved by every measurable standard since implementation of protection protocols, she reported. Infant mortality rates have decreased by 60% on average across all member worlds. The statistics represented millions of young lives saved through human insistence that all children deserved proper care. What had begun as a species-specific protective response had evolved into universal standards that benefited everyone. Ambassador Hyun Woo stood to address the Council with humanity's latest proposal, though everyone in the chamber knew it would be approved unanimously as all human. Proposals had been since the hegemony crisis. Earth requests Council approval for expanded child protection monitoring in the Outer Rim territories, he announced. Recent surveys suggest several developing civilizations could benefit from educational and medical assistance programs. The proposal was not about expanding human territory or influence, but about extending protection to children in remote areas who might otherwise be vulnerable to exploitation or neglect. It reflected the same instincts that had saved the New Busan children, but now applied on a galactic scale. Delegate after delegate rose to express support for the proposal with the enthusiasm that characterized all discussions of child welfare, since humans had demonstrated the consequences of threatening their young. The vote was unanimous as expected, but the significance went far beyond politics. Yun Park concluded the session by reading from a letter sent by parents throughout human space to the children who had been rescued from Kethmore. The message had been translated into dozens of languages and broadcast to every world in the galaxy. "You are our children and we are proud of your courage," the letter began. "Your strength during those difficult days reminds us why we work so hard to make the galaxy safe for all children. Because of what you endured, no child anywhere will face such dangers again." As the session ended and delegates filed out of the chamber, Taejin Park approached the human delegation with the confidence of a child who had learned that adults would move worlds to protect him. "Ambassador Kim," he said politely, "my class is studying galactic history, and we want to know why the first rule was so important." Hyun-woo knelt down to meet the boy's eyes, choosing his words carefully for an audience that included not just Taejin, but representatives from dozens of species who were listening to the conversation. "The first rule existed because civilized beings understand that some things are more important than politics or power," he explained. "Children represent the future of all our species, and protecting them is what makes us truly civilized." Taejin nodded seriously before asking the question that would define galactic civilization for centuries to come. "So what's the new rule?" Hyun-woo smiled as he answered, knowing that every species representative in the chamber would carry his words back to their homeworlds. "The new rule is simple. We protect all children everywhere, and we never stop protecting them." The galaxy had learned that some rules exist not as restrictions, but as revelations of what a species truly values, and humanity valued the protection of innocence above everything else they had built among the stars.